Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you're listening. In this episode, I chat with Matt Clerkin. Now, I used to work with Matt at Havas People, and he worked in the world of ATSs. He's now actually spent the last couple of years moving into creative director and creative strategy role, and he's worked with some amazing brands in that short space of time. So this really is just a chance to talk about what he's been doing in the consumer world and those kind of learnings we can take into the world of employer marketing. Let's get on with the chat. Good morning, Matt. How you doing?
I'm not too bad, thanks, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Happy Friday.
Yeah. Happy Friday to you as well. It's been obviously a weird week, and we will try not to dwell too much on the lockdown 2.0, I guess. But
yeah, day two.
Something happening in America as well, apparently, but who knows?
Oh, yeah. I don't know what's going on there.
Not much if you're in the state of Nevada, but yeah.
Say reality stranger than fiction sometimes, don't they say?
Yes, very much so.
So yeah, goodness. Anyway, so thanks for taking the time out. I know you're busy, but it's great to have a bit of a chat. Let's start off with just introducing yourself and tell us what you're doing at the moment.
Sure. So my name is Matt Clerkin. I am a creative director and a creative strategist at The Rig Out, which is a creative agency based in London. So we predominantly work across kind of music, fashion, sport content. Originally from a kind of editorial-based magazine and progress from there. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at the moment.
Stuff, and we've worked together before during our Havas Day. So it's kind of great to see you doing some really cool stuff.
It was the good old glory days. I didn't really see the pathway or the segue from ATS to creative direction, but here we are. So I'm sure throughout the podcast I'll try and make sense of the journey and probably learn more myself than anyone else. But yeah, it's always kind of good to understand how I've got to the point I'm at, I guess.
I think like zigzagging in your career, whichever other terminology you want to use, but that kind of zigzag and doing different things is always, I think God has no doubt helped you and kind of to get you where you are now, rather than taking a linear route that's often, the way in careers, isn't it?
I think so. I think, you and I actually had a conversation the other day about it. And I think the zigzag is very valid. Zigzag / ups and downs as well, I'd probably say. But
yeah, too right. Yeah.
But it's one of those things. I think a linear path. I don't know how many people in any profession now kind of have a linear path to the goal that they want to reach. I think it's very much kind of scattergun approach to things. And I think in my life specifically, it's been a process of elimination rather than having a single focused goal, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone listening, but it is a way of getting to where you want to be, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And so you say you work at The Rig Out, and some of the projects you've been working on sound really, really cool. And I think what I want to do is just spend some time kind of dip into the world of consumer marketing and give our listeners a bit of a feel for what goes on in there, because I think by looking outside of the world of employer branding and employer marketing, you often get your best inspiration, and actually it's more chance you can do different things in employer marketing. So I think for me, this is actually a big part of the podcast is about doing things that haven't been done in the employer marketing space. So yeah, let's have a chat about some of the stuff you've been working on.
Sure.
What should we do first? What's your number
one? So we had the sports mask for Under Armour released or kind of aired on, I think Sunday was the first airing of it. So that was the one with Anthony Joshua, which was awesome. a pretty amazing project to work on. So
did you call him champ?
I did. Yeah, for my sins, I did. So I'll try and keep it as kind of professional as possible. But there are numerous stories of being on set that day which were quite funny. But yeah, the one of I basically had to. We had a loose script around the mask. So for context, the sports mask is, as is very big at the moment, a face covering specifically for the gym and for kind of performance athletes, designed to help you breathe properly. I won't go too much into the specs. I'm not trying to plug it, but kind of it sits comfortably on your face. There's a cooling system. They are actually pretty brilliant. But yeah, so had to loosely interview him about the mask, and we had 6 hours with him total. So towards the kind of last hour, I managed to loosen up around him. But yeah, for the first question, I think I said, "How's it going, champ?" And everyone pretty much just burst into laughter. So, so what not to do when you're interviewing the heavyweight champion of the world? Point number one.
Wow.
But yeah, but that was very, very good, fun, interesting shoot, and learnt a lot from that one.
So what did you so what was the objective of it, of this piece of content that you shot with Anthony Joshua?
Sure, it was kind of, as I touched upon before, it's about the sports mask, and it was a very difficult brief because of the terminology that you are allowed, and more specifically not allowed, to use. So they kind of gave us a loose brief at the beginning, said Anthony Joshua in the UK and globally is one of the biggest athletes that they have on the Under Armour roster. So they said kind of off the bat, you'll get to work with him, think about what you want to do, etc., etc. So we kind of started brainstorming and coming up with ideas for this mask, and then immediately you're kind of thinking kind of corona, COVID, breathability, etc., etc. And then we got an email just being like, do not use any of these words, do not use any of these quotes or whatever. So the mask itself they kind of went through how they patented it, but it's not, corona free, as is no mask on the market. Like, no one can advertise it as being. But yeah, it was an interesting one as well, because it came out. I think it came out in North America first, and they sold something crazy like 30,000 units in the space of like an hour or 2 hours. So I think it was one of those where it was a kind of double-edged sword, because you thought, well, if it's done that well there, then it will probably do well over here. But they've seen that the bar has been set. Like, they want that level of success in the UK and Europe, and now we have to replicate that. So it was one of those things where, yes, it had done well, but we had to kind of make the content a bit more UK centric and a bit more UK focused in order to kind of sell those same level of units, which, as far as I'm aware, we're not too far off at the moment, actually. But yeah, it was an interesting brief to work on because of the red tape around what you can and can't say in terms of the mask's capabilities.
Because you can't make claims that could be seen as being false or tapping into people's fears of coronavirus. And yeah, I'm sure Under Armour didn't want to be associated with.
Yeah, well, that's it as well. And it's also like, with something like corona and COVID that's so prevalent at the moment, you also have like a moral obligation. Like, even if they'd have said you are allowed to say it's corona proof, or like, unless you can certify that it is, like, you would be crazy to go down the route of advertising something like that. It's not. It's something that's a very difficult one. And I think, I've seen a lot of, as we all have at the moment, seen a lot of the kind of corona adverts and stuff out there, and kind of banks telling you that they're going to be there to support you and this, that, and the other. And I think you've just got to be a bit careful when you're stepping into the realms of trying to talk about helping people with a product when it comes to corona and COVID. It's a bit of a minefield.
So I'll be dropping a link into the video. I remember seeing it on, I'm sure I saw it on TV, and I think shouted at the TV, and my wife was like, Matt did that.
Yeah.
So it's great to see it. And it was, how long was the ad? So would it have been, I think it was maybe 30 seconds.
Yeah, we as with anything in this day and age, it's kind of rehashed and repurposed for every, but it was we had a 30-second, a 20-second, and a few different 15s with alternating outfits as well, and then there are a few 6-second cut downs just for social, where that was basically where the interview was cut down when I spoke with AJ. So he was just going through the kind of benefits of the mask, the functionality, the fit, the design, etc., etc. But yeah, to be completely honest, and I don't know if I'll get in trouble for this, but we shot it in really high spec, and it was kind of everything was really well done, but we weren't sure if it was going to be a TVC. And it was only, you always have the contingencies in place in terms of usage and whatnot. It's always there in the budget, and just in case it does get the nod. But we found out two or 3 days before it aired, and I think it was on during England v Italy in the rugby, and then I actually saw it the next day in the halftime of United v Arsenal. But I think the biggest one was my mum messaged me 3 days later saying, I've just seen it at the advert break in Coronation Street, which is, it's one of those things where she usually would have left to go make a cuppa as well. So I'm surprised she caught it. But
she goes, "That's what you do." Okay.
Yeah. That was, you know what? I finally had some sort of like visual aid to help my parents understand what I do, and I think it becomes easier when you have a visual aid. I mean, I even remember, when I used to work with you, when I was like doing ATS systems and stuff, trying to explain that there wasn't enough graphs or diagrams in the world to help me out on that front. So it's becoming gradually easier to explain what my role is and what I'm doing, I think.
So you had a collection there of outputs here, didn't you? You basically had your interview content.
Mm-hmm.
With AJ, and then you had some different content as well. So it was him actually boxing in the gym, wasn't it?
Because I've seen him in the gym, along with the music that they have with the kind of French horns, that very kind of American sound. It works quite nicely together,
So he's sparring in the gym basically, and you're getting some really close-up shots of him doing that. And then I remember something about kind of all of a sudden he's launched I think it was a right hook.
Yeah.
And the camera just moves, so it feels like you've actually been punched yourself.
Yeah. So that was kind of one of those things where, again, you've got to be careful of what channel it's going out on. So we always had in the back of our mind that it might be a TVC. So I think at the beginning with that shot where that kind of overhand right comes in, I think on social and on mobile, you can kind of get away with a bit more movement in that. But if it's a TVC, you kind of can't go too over the top. So it's one of those things where you're constantly thinking about the channels and where it's going to go out and how it's going to be viewed and how it's going to be consumed. And therefore you kind of have to use the right techniques that go with it and complement that, which is
awesome.
It's not something that's not revolutionary, but I think especially for me, in the like getting more into the creative, I've also got to remember the stuff from when I was like an account handler, to remember those kind of things that you're like, actually, we've got to do this. We've got to, almost like a tick box exercise that you have in your mind going, we've got to make sure this is covered. We've got to make sure we do this, etc. So yeah, it was quite an interesting one to put the creative together, but with a kind of account handling perspective as well.
100%, mate. I think it's, it's for me, it's the antithesis to, well, let's do TV spot and then just put it out on social as well.
Yeah.
Fundamentally understanding the platform, the platform is on, the platforms it's going to be on. So splicing and dicing it, cutting up, but going beyond just saying, well, we need a 6-second version of that. It's going, that isn't right for the big screen, but it's perfect for mobile. Is absolutely the right way of doing it.
Do you know what's really funny is you saying that is I remember being an account manager or an account director somewhere, and I never understood why creatives got so annoyed about that. As in, like, if it was a 30-second TVC, all right, we need to chop it and make a 6-second, we're going to put loads of paid media behind it for social. And you know, you'd hear the creatives go like, but it wasn't intended for that. It wasn't meant to be that. You can't just, and I'll just be like, it's fine, just cut it down. It's cool. And I just never got it. And then now I really want to offer an apology to any creative whose creative I might have butchered back in the day by just cutting it down to a 6 second and saying that it would be fine. So I do actually apologize for that. I understand it now. I get it.
Although I think there is a bit of so that desire not wanting to lose all the good stuff, but actually it's about understanding that you're not going to put it in front of somebody once. It's not as much as anyone involved in creating content would love, you know, every single time for their one piece of content to actually change someone's mind or convince someone to do something.
Yeah, no, I hear that.
It's not going to happen. Yeah, it's not going to happen. So it's a bit tough to decide on what to leave out because you want to try and say as much as possible. But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? Is to do those little bits that give you a little bit of an insight into what else is going to be coming.
I guess that's it. And I guess you've got to make sure that the central message still resonates and comes through. As in, like, you know, if you're stripping bits away left, right, and center, then, you know, you don't want to do it so much that you dilute the proposition of what you're making in the first place, because then it's kind of quite counterproductive, I guess.
Well, then if you start on the basis of knowing exactly what platforms you're going to be on, and what edits you need, then when you shoot with that in mind, then absolutely it's going to be bang on, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, well, in the episode description, I'll put in links to the videos, so ping them over when you got them, and I think it will be good examples of how actually you've got, you know, various types of content in terms of what's actually being talked about and what's being shown, but also the different formats as well. So I'll drop those in the episode description.
Nice, appreciate it.
And we got another one, slightly different space.
Oh yeah, good segue there as well. So just finished working on something for Headspace, which if anyone's not aware of what it is, it's a kind of mindfulness app that's pretty useful. And without boring you with too much context, I was kind of one of those people that always thought that, like, meditating and mindfulness was just a bit wishy-washy, just really wrongly turned my nose up at it and was like, I don't really get it, don't really understand it. Thought that sitting there doing yoga or kind of meditation was sitting in a room cross-legged umming for hours on end. But kind of completely wrong, got it completely wrong, understand it a lot more. So I've actually been using Headspace for about a year now. And they got in touch asking if we had any ideas or any concepts of anything we wanted to work on. So I, along with the guys at the Rig Out, so Glenn, the founder, kind of helped me piece together a kind of concept for the morning. So they have something called the Wake Up, which is a segment which is designed to stop people from going onto social media or even like the news first thing. So pretty much the key takings are like your day can be determined within the first 5 minutes of waking up. So if you go straight onto, take this morning, for example, you go straight onto either social media and it's a wash of lockdown 2.0 or Trump and Biden, you go onto Guardian or BBC or whatever, you're going to get loads of Trump, Biden, American stuff. And it's kind of like, you do need to know this stuff, but there's a time and a place, and first thing in the morning, it's definitely not that. So they just have this segment called the Wake Up, and but it's quite broad. They have loads of different content curators that make bits for them, and they do a lot of it in-house. It's just like a kind of 3 to 5 minute video that is just uplifting for the day. So whether it's about meditation, yoga, kind of stories, spoken word, etc., just a nice little kind of pick me up and a lift in the morning. So I was curious about people with objects, and they were quite keen to not use inanimate objects because the whole thing of mindfulness is that you don't need anything else. But the treatment developed in a way that it wasn't people saying, I'm really grateful that I have a 700 grand Ferrari in my garage. It's just kind of like people that have a certain object that reminds them of mindfulness, that act as like a constant reminder or a push to take 5 minutes to sit down and go, actually, I might be a bit overwhelmed with everything at the moment, but this object reminds me to just take 5, chill out, get my thoughts together, compose myself, and go about my business. So the first episode that aired last week was a young lad, an artist called Joe from London, who has a necklace from his grandma that passed away a few years ago. So he wears it all the time, and he's kind of not conscious of wearing it, but every now and again he'll see something, he'll see himself in the mirror or reflection wearing the necklace, and it kind of reminds him of her, and then all the associations that are with her, and kind of almost reminds him to be a better person and show the characteristics that she displayed.
It's really nice.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it's kind of it's really nice hearing people's stories, because it was quite a difficult one to cast, because it's quite a niche thing to do, because you kind of run the risk of having, when I first came up with the idea and was talking to people, you got people that are like, yeah, well, I wear my lucky pants during the Arsenal game. Well, it's not quite the approach I wanted to go for, to be honest with it. But there is still a level of superstition, or I don't know. It's quite hard. So we kind of, I think we done a lot of Instagram calls out between myself, Glenn, Teddy, who was the producer that worked in it as well, and just from the rig out, and we had a lot of responses, but we had to filter out a lot of them just because they weren't quite right. But now that we've got 3 episodes, it means that we can show people those episodes. So there's like a call to action at the end of an email address, which is thanks to you at headspace.com if anyone's got anything. But yeah, it's easier now to show people. Like, even me trying to articulate it whilst talking about it is quite difficult. So if you see the episodes, it becomes a lot clearer. But yeah, that was a big one as well, because sometimes you get an incredibly tough brief and it's quite hard to impress a client, whereas this was the complete other end of the spectrum. This was a very open-ended, like, do you have anything to offer, or do you want to work with anything? And you've got to be like objective yourself. There's still got to be KPIs and metrics put in place to determine if it was a successful piece of content, but they weren't driving it. They kind of opened up the floor for us and for me to go, actually, I want to do this, or I want to do that, which is amazing and also very difficult at the same time. And you kind of realize that every time you've had a client that's had a brief that's very specific and you don't see eye to eye, it can actually be quite helpful, because at least you're working towards a shared goal.
Yeah, true.
So yeah, but that's been a wicked piece to work on at the moment. Really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, episode 1 was out last week, and then episode 2 and 3 come out in the next couple of weeks, I think. So I'll give you a heads up when they're on the horizon.
Yeah, we'll drop episode 1 into the episode description, I think, the podcast with this episode. And I think actually it's that's really interesting, because I think about Under Armour and Anthony Joshua project. I suppose there's this thing about it's the love of the sports star. It's the aspiration you feel with that global icon that's going to kind of help convince you to purchase something. Whereas this is I think it's showing, actually, not to say that of course Anthony Joshua of course has a story, but I think there's, with the Headspace thing, it's very much about those stories that people can empathize with.
Yeah, very much.
Go, right, you know what, that is me, or that's someone I know. So I'm either going to consume it myself or give it to someone else. So I didn't want to say the power of storytelling. it's that, isn't it? Yeah. Without wanting to use, marketing cliches and phrases, but I really like that kind of that difference.
It's an interesting one as well, and I think last time we spoke, we were drawing the parallels and the differences between kind of consumer facing and then kind of employee engagement and whatnot. And I think we've been able to use like the likes for Anthony Joshua, you still have to have a concept. It still has to be good, has to be shot well, but you kind of have this thing of like, well, we've got Anthony Joshua in this. Like it's gonna hit. It's gonna hit certain channels, gonna hit certain people, gonna resonate. Unless you have an absolute clanger, you've got a bit of a buffer there to work with. And then, I remember some of the stuff when I was at Havas, like some of the ideas and the creative that I saw that was just kind of stuck with me to this day, with the kind of stuff that Sean and like Dan Gregory and Dunks and people like that were doing. Like some of the stuff, and I mean it in the most respectful way, isn't the most entertaining, or you're not going to win a neutral audience by it, but some of the creative that came out of it was so smart and so clever that you've got to have that level of like, it's a very crowded market, and it must be very difficult to get cut through. But the ideas that these guys have churned out, from what I've seen over the years, has been amazing. Like I remember,
You've got to work harder, haven't you? Got to work.
Exactly. You don't have, and I'd be very careful not to be like self-deprecating in terms of being able to do like the Under Armour stuff, and like just having AJ doesn't make for a great bit of content, but it bloody well helps. Like, but I remember one of the things that really sticks out in my mind that I spoke to you about before is that whole like interactive thing. I think it was with like Noms, and that blew my mind at the time. That was before I even knew I wanted to do anything creative, and that was just someone. There was no bias there. There was no like, oh, I'm championing it because it's people in my agency. I was, across the office in a dark corner. So there was no allegiance. I just remember seeing that creative and thinking, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, that was Is It In You to Be a Prison Officer, wasn't it? And
I think it's the kind of first
video of the actor in the prison cell,
literally
getting in your face, which you would get at the assessment center anyway. Actors would be playing a role of a challenging inmate. So it was great. I love working on that.
I think as well. I mean, I don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like on that was like the first time I'd seen. I'm sure it existed. I'm not saying that it was invented in Farringdon on that day, but the level of like interactive content it was probably the first time that I had ever seen that, in terms of, I think it gave you like multiple scenarios of what you would do, and et cetera, and I just remember kind of being very inspired by that bit of work.
That's awesome. And it's I think definitely if we look at as you say, the kind of parallels with the employer marketing space, I think certainly it's from the Under Armour stuff, what really comes out in particular is, I think really thinking about the outputs right at the very beginning, as opposed to retrospectively thinking about that. Which means you've got content that absolutely sits on channels in the right way, and that mix between kind of showpiece sparring, content, just him in the gym, to then actually him having a conversation. I think it's a really nice balance. But then you've got Headspace, which is absolutely focusing on the story, and that story in the same way than in the employer space. If you hear a story that really, really strikes a chord with you, then there is an element of rapport that's already built between you and that organization.
Yeah, I think so. I think that definitely rings true. And I think you're trying to get to an honest truth with that, aren't you? Again, like you with the Headspace stories, you don't want to fabricate something, because that this would mean a lot to a lot of people and will probably help a lot of people. And I guess in the employer branding space, you want to unearth the truth of an institution or place that you're doing the branding piece for. So if you're doing testimonials, you kind of want to know that they're true. You kind of want to know what the turnover rate is of employees or whatnot. You kind of want to make sure that you unearth that real truth, because then it just makes it better. It makes the whole thing a lot more genuine and a lot more kind of tangible to more people.
Yeah, that truth is basically is and use another phrase, buzzword, authenticity, isn't it? A better way of saying authentic is something that is true to the organization, true to the experience that people have, or the opinions that people have in the organization, so that therefore if someone joins that organization, the way they behave is natural to that organization. They aren't doing things that don't feel right to them. And actually that does fit very nicely into what Headspace is about as well. It's about, doing things that you are naturally, inclined to do. So yeah, it's that's been really interesting. Actually, it's I'm sure we could I'm sure we could talk for much longer, but I think this in particular has been great to chat about, 2 projects you've been working on. I'll drop in some links to that content in the episode, and maybe we do another one later on next year where we're actually, showing the videos while we actually talk.
No, it sounds kind of a running commentary.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. Nice, mate. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
No, my pleasure. Have a good weekend, Joe.
Cheers, pal. Take care, and you.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to follow or subscribe for the latest episode drops. And don't forget to get in touch if you want to contribute.